Fire up, way back machine. Relive the classic video gaming scene. Sit down, enjoy the classic clips of memory, courtesy of video game history.
It's hard to believe the dramatic shift that the culture of video games has taken. We live in a world now where adult themes, violent themes, and sexual themes are the norm. But what if I told you that all video games used to be G-rated? Well, sort of. Back in the 1980s, when Nintendo was gearing up for a North American release, the company decided to take a hard stance and make all games kid-friendly, which made sense, considering that was the target demographic. But that's all changed, hasn't it? Because those kids have now grown up to become adults, but are still doing kid things. Let's open up that can of worms for a moment. How come our generation seems to be the only generation that never grew up? Transformers are still huge, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are making a comeback, and we don't want the kid versions either. No, we want adult, dark, gritty, Christopher Nolan Batman versions of all of our favorite games, properties, and movies. This would be like our parents demanding a dark, gritty, sexually overt, live-action Jetsons movie. Which actually sounds pretty awesome. With very few exceptions, all of the games of the 80s and early 90s were good, clean fun. And most importantly, kid-friendly. Then, 1992 happened. 2 games came under fire by American senators. Because government. Well, actually because they were concerned about the realistic replica of human figures in the games. These 2 games were equally responsible for the creation of the Entertainment Software Ratings Board, or the ESRB. So let's take a look at a chunk of video game history and relive the 2 games that established the now standard MA rating. First up is the most well-known, Mortal Kombat. This game was an arcade classic. I recall literally lines of kids waiting to duke it out on this violent fighter game. The best part of Mortal Kombat was the blood and fatalities. Let's be honest, the actual gameplay was pretty mediocre and paled in comparison to its competitor in Street Fighter. But Mortal Kombat more than made up for its shortcomings with shocking graphics and finishing moves, which at the time was unheard of. Mortal Kombat was the first game to feature realistic-looking characters. With a mixture of photos and stop-motion animation, they pushed the software beyond its limitation and raised the question, if we're okay with cartoon violence, how do we feel about real violence? MK was the poster child for the need of a video games rating board, mostly because it was hugely successful. The game completely embraced its violence as opposed to trying to shield it. The game also made blood and death its focal point, and kids ate it up. Perhaps this is the real crux of the argument. Maybe the senators were more upset with the social shift of Generation X than inappropriate video games coming out. Now, the other game that is also responsible for the ratings board was Night Trap. This game is significant for 2 reasons. One, first, it was exclusive to the Sega CD, and second, it featured over 90 minutes of full motion video. Night Trap was a stupid game in which you try to trap vampires by setting, well, you guessed it, traps. You play as Control, watching monitors of hidden cameras placed throughout the house to see girls breaking in. This would be creepy if... no, actually, it's just creepy. Throughout the game, you spring traps on vampires at specific times in order to catch them and protect the innocent characters. Doesn't necessarily sound questionable. But that's until you realize that most of the 90 minutes of full motion video was actually pretty sexually suggestive. On top of that, the entire plot of the game was to capture and then kill women. Well, that's according to the Senate hearings. They were actually vampires. I mean, come on, didn't you even play the game? Well, actually, nobody did. You had to own a Sega CD, which was an add-on to the Genesis. So you had to already own a Genesis and then pay extra for a Sega CD add-on, and then purchase the game, which had already been made less available because of its content. But even if you somehow own this game, you would have been really disappointed because it sucks. And trust me, it's considerably tame compared to what's coming out now. Let's talk about that for a second. The real concern and reason for the ESRB was to rate games so that the audience would have an idea of the content contained in the game. Now, video games hadn't really changed as far as theme leading up to this point. It was actually only when things became graphically realistic that this became an issue. So Congress is okay with you murdering people by the bushel, as long as they don't look like real people. The real issue here is that the average age of a gamer has increased significantly. The kids that grew up in the 80s playing the Nintendo are still playing video games, and they desire some adult themes. Unfortunately, the younger generations are playing these games as well, and they're subjected to some, well, pretty graphic stuff. Now, I know you think I'm being negative, but I'm not. I think the world needs this kind of reality check, because that's what it is. Reality is rough and brutal, a lot like the themes that are in these games, a lot like what's being portrayed on your screens. Now, if you can escape some of that rough and brutal reality by playing a video game, then more power to you. I just wish you'd all be a little more positive about it.